At 5:48 in the morning, somewhere over the forests of the southern Urals, roughly a dozen Ukrainian Liutyi drones were flying east. A few hundred meters off the deck, each one holding a route it had memorized before takeoff, counting down the last of a journey that had already run 1,700 kilometers. Nothing on the ground below them was reacting. 200 kilometers ahead, at an airfield called Shagol, the two Su-57s sat wing to wing on the apron, fueled, uncovered, and certain they were safe. That distance was the only armor they had, and within the hour it would burn off the apron with them still parked on it. They were Russia's only fifth-generation stealth fighters, the jets built to answer the F-22, the ones Moscow has fewer than 30 of. A tow tractor idled near the lead aircraft. A maintenance crew moved between the airframes in the cold, checking panels unhurried. Above them, the sky over the Urals was empty, and that emptiness had always been the point. No Ukrainian weapon had ever reached this far east. The distance was the armor. By 9:14 that morning, the distance would still be exactly 1,700 kilometers, and two of those jets would be under tarpaulins, waiting to learn whether they would fly again. Several hours earlier, those same machines had been crossing Russia in the dark, flying east in loose groups. The Liutyi is Ukrainian-built, fixed-wing, single-use, a fiberglass airframe the size of a light aircraft riding a 50-horsepower piston engine at the tail. It cruises at 160 kilometers an hour and carries a warhead of roughly 75 kilograms. It is not fast, it is not stealthy. It is a poor man's cruise missile, and its only real talent is range. Far enough now to put the Urals inside the box. The dozen had not launched as a single arrow aimed at Shagol. They had launched as a problem. Some were built to strike, others were built only to be seen. That distinction was the whole plan. Ukraine did not need every drone to live. It needed Russia to spend its attention on the wrong ones. The first group climbed onto a heading that pointed at nothing in particular, an industrial corridor northwest of the target, a region thick with rail yards and power lines, and the kind of infrastructure that makes regional air defense officers nervous. These were the decoys. From a Russian screen, they looked exactly like what everyone feared, a deep strike raid feeling for a refinery. They were flown to draw the eye. Behind them, lower and quieter, and on a different line entirely, the strike drones held their own course toward the airfield, each one carrying a route it had memorized before takeoff. For the first hours, nobody saw any of it. A Liutyi flies low, and low is where radar goes blind. The curve of the Earth hides a target skimming a few hundred meters until it is almost overhead. A ground radar that reaches 400 kilometers against a high jet sees a fraction of that against something hugging the terrain. The drones crossed forest and river and frozen road with nothing below them reacting. The engines droned on. The farther east they pushed, the less any Russian operator could assume the threat was someone else's problem near the border. Then the first contact flickered onto a regional screen, and the morning changed. It was one of the decoys, 200 kilometers northwest of Shagol, caught for a few seconds by a long-range surveillance radar before it dropped back into the clutter. An operator logged it, lost it, found it again on the next sweep 10 kilometers further along. Reports began stacking up out of order. Engine noise heard over a town. A civilian airport quietly halting departures. A second intermittent track that might have been the same drone or might have been another one. The picture would not hold still. The operators were trying to assemble one clear arrow out of a dozen contacts that appeared, vanished, and reappeared across a piece of territory the size of a country. The questions came faster than the answers. How many were there? Where were they going? And the one that mattered most, were they even coming from Ukraine? Or had they been launched from somewhere inside Russia by someone already on the ground? Command did what command does. It assigned weapons. The first layer was electronic. Jammers across the threatened corridor came up, flooding the navigation bands, reaching for the satellite signals the drones might be steering by. On paper, it should have scattered them. Against a Shagol-class machine leaning on GPS, it might have. But a Liutyi does not need the sky to tell it where it is. It carries an inertial system and a route loaded before launch. And a jammer can deny a signal it cannot find, a drone that has stopped listening. Cut off from the sky, that inertial system still walks off course. Perhaps a kilometer for every hour it flies blind. But a route this short is over before the drift grows into a miss. One contact in the Decoy group did wander further than the rest, its track bending west, then gone. The operators watching it counted a win. They had no way to know they had spent their jamming on a machine that had been built to be expendable, and that the drones that mattered had never been talking to anything at all. Then a surface-to-air battery, somewhere along the Decoy line, finally held a track long enough to fire. The radar caught one of the northwestern drones cleanly. A stable return, a firing solution, a missile off the rail at several times the speed of sound. The drone simply continued, slow and straight, until the warhead reached it and erased it from the sky. One confirmed kill. On the command net, the mood shifted. The interception worked. The raid was being taken apart, contact by contact, exactly the way the manuals promised. A regional officer could be forgiven for believing the worst was already behind him. He was destroying real threats. His mistake was assuming they were the threats that mattered. A pair of fighters was already climbing to find the rest. They were Su-35s, single-seat, twin-engine, among the most capable air superiority jets Russia flies, scrambled now to hunt something a fraction of their size. The ground sent them toward the freshest strong contact, which sat firmly in the Decoy corridor, well northwest of the airfield. From the cockpit, it should have been simple. It was not. A Su-35 closing at the speed of a fighter has to find a fiberglass drone crawling at 160 against the broken ground below. A small, cold, slow shape lost in the radar return of forest and rooftops. Flying beneath the entire world, a fast jet is built to fight in. The lead pilot worked the contact, lost it, brought his nose back around. The drone was so slow the geometry kept breaking. He was overrunning a target that practically hung in the air. Then he caught it and fired, and a second drone came apart over the trees. 2 down now. And every signal pointed the same wrong way. More contacts in the northwest faded, jammed, intercepted, or simply lost in the noise. And the picture the command net assembled from the wreckage was clean, confident, and exactly backwards. The package was breaking up. The main body had been beaten in the northwest. Whatever was left was stragglers. The fighters were pulled further into the Decoy corridor to finish them. On the ground, security forces began chasing the other ghost. The possibility of a launch team hidden somewhere nearby, throwing patrols at open country, looking for an operator who might have been 1,000 kilometers away and was not, by then, talking to the drones at all. Russia had found the raid. It had not yet found the mission. While the fighters burned fuel over the wrong sector, the strike drones, the ones nobody had been tracking, crossed their final waypoints and turned, together, toward Shagol. There had been no live command, no operator pulling them in. The convergence had been written into them before they ever left the ground. 4 separate routes, timed to fold onto one airfield within minutes of each other. The first hint anyone at the base had that the morning was about to arrive was a warning passed down the chain. Unidentified drones, possibly still active, possibly inbound. After hours of someone else's emergency 200 kilometers away, it landed on the apron with very little time attached to it. And then the hard truth of the place revealed itself. You cannot scatter a flight line in a hurry. A Su-57 is not a car. Pilots were not sitting in the cockpits. Engines need a start sequence. The tow tractor that had idled near the lead jet at dawn could move one aircraft at a time, and only after someone disconnected the equipment still tethered to it. A cold 5th-generation fighter needs the better part of 10 minutes to wake, run its checks, and roll clear of the line. The warning passed down the chain had bought the base perhaps 3. ground power, panels, the slow choreography of waking a fighter, all of it measured against a clock that was already short. Crews ran for the most valuable airframes. Someone fought to back the tractor into position, lost a fitting, started again. The two stealth fighters that had sat wing to wing in the dark were still nearly wing to wing now. And the minutes the start sequence demanded were minutes the drones were not going to give them. The last ring of defense was the one standing on the airfield itself. A pantsier covered the apron, the close-in goalkeeper, a truck carrying 12 missiles, and a pair of 30mm cannons. The system whose entire job is killing exactly this kind of leaker. Its radar reached out for the incoming drones. But a pantsier guides 4 missiles at 4 targets at once. And the strike drones were not arriving as 4 neat tracks on one bearing. They were closing from different directions on different timing, each one demanding the radar swing and reset. The cannons were worse off. They reach about 4 kilometers, and inside that ring, against low crossing targets folding in from several sides at once, there was time to service some of them and not all of them. The first penetrator was inside 12 kilometers and closing at 160 an hour, roughly 4.5 minutes of flight to the parking area, and the radar was still trying to decide which of the contacts smearing across its screen was the one that mattered. The system caught one. A drone died near the perimeter, a hard flash and a fall of fragments somewhere short of the parking area. And for a few seconds, the crews who saw it believed the worst had been stopped at the fence. The tractor was moving now, dragging the lead Su-57 by its nose gear, a meter at a time across concrete that suddenly felt enormous. Then another engine came out of a different quarter of the sky, and the first explosion landed among the aircraft. It came in low across the apron and detonated near the concentration of jets. And the blast crossed open concrete that had nothing on it but fighters and the men trying to move them. Personnel went flat or ran. The service vehicle that had been edging one airframe clear was caught in it and began to burn. The pantsier was already swinging toward the next bearing as a second drone bored in from another angle. Its missiles committed, its cannons reaching for a target that was inside the geometry before the barrels could follow. A third engine note layered over the second. Crews who had been hauling at a tow bar a moment earlier were now only trying to get behind something solid. Smoke climbed off the apron and folded over the parking area until the airframes inside it were just shapes. And what had been done to them could not be read from the ground. When the last engine cut out, no one standing on that concrete could have told you which of those jets would ever fly again. High above the wrong sector, the fighters were turning back. The call had reached them at last. Shagol hit behind them, while they chased stragglers over a corridor that had been built to hold their attention. There was nothing in the cockpit that could reach back across that distance and undo a strike that had already touched the ground. They flew toward the smoke over the base they had been scrambled to protect, and watched it rise. What the smoke hid took days to read. Emergency crews worked the apron, foam on the burning service vehicle, panels checked, debris dragged clear. Security throwing a perimeter around the worst of it, while the most valuable airframes were towed out of sight and put under cover. From the ground, in the hours after, almost anything could be claimed about the damage, and was. The real verdict came from orbit. When analysts laid one satellite pass over an earlier one, the apron told a quieter, harder story. Aircraft moved from where they had stood at dawn, the burnt scar of a service vehicle. Jets pulled into restricted and covered positions, the unmistakable shape of a base hiding what was left. The count, when it was settled, was 4. 2 Su-57 stealth fighters, 1 Su-34 strike bomber, 1 more Sukhoi airframe whose exact type was never pinned down. All of them damaged in varying degrees. And damaged on a fleet of fewer than 30 fifth-generation jets is its own kind of catastrophe. The arithmetic of the morning was brutal in a way no single explosion captured. A long-range Ukrainian drone cost somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000. A single Su-57 runs past 100 million. Russia spent fighter sorties, surface-to-air missiles priced in the millions, jammers, and an entire morning of effort, and it spent almost all of it correctly. On contacts, it really did kill in a sector where the threat really had been. It still lost the only thing that mattered. The defense did not fail because it was blind. It failed because it could not tell, in time, which of the things it could see was the one it could not afford to miss. Russia can pull the surviving jets into shelters. It can move them east again to the next field it believes is far enough. What it can no longer do is move the Urals farther from Ukraine. The distance was never the armor. It was only the assumption.